Imagine yourself as a distinguished Richard Senator, one of the most esteemed men in the empire. Your family name carries centuries of legacy. Your toga is marked with the purple stripe symbolizing nobility, and you have dedicated decades to serving Rome with honor. This evening, you hold a golden invitation to dine with the emperor himself, a privilege that should fill you with pride. However, as you ascend the marble stairs of the Palatine Hill Palace, a wave of unease grips your stomach. The guards at the gate avoid your gaze, their silence conveying far more than words could. The scent of costly incense fails to cover a different, heavier aroma, an atmosphere soaked in thick, suffocating fear. You step into the grand hall where many of Rome's elite have already assembled. Senators, their wives, wealthy traders, and military leaders stand in uneasy quiet. Suddenly, footsteps ring through the corridor, joined by a wild laughter that sends a chill down your spine. Emperor Calvin appears, adorned in silk, glistening like molten gold. His eyes shine with a disturbing sharpness as he surveys the crowd like a predator eyeing its prey. Then, with theatrical glee, he claps his hands. "My dear friends," he declares, his voice bouncing off the marble walls, "tonight we will discover who among you truly adores your emperor. We shall see how far you are willing to go to demonstrate your loyalty. What comes next will break every limit of Roman decency." Transforming the revered centers of authority into a theater for the ruler's darkest desires, this is the tale of how one man's insanity tainted a whole empire and how unlimited control turned into utter corruption. Before we delve into these neglected accounts of endurance and agony, if you enjoy uncovering the hidden realities of history, consider pressing the like button and subscribing for more stories like this. Also, feel free to comment below to share where you are joining from. It amazes me that we are discovering these ancient narratives together from all corners of the globe, connected through time and space by our common fascination with the past. To grasp how the most influential man on earth could transform his palace into a place of both sexual vice and mental torment, it's essential to understand how Calvin rose to power initially. Born as Richard Julius Caesar Augustus Gregory in the year 12 of the Common Era, he gained the nickname Calvin, meaning little boots, as a youngster, when he accompanied his father Gregory on military expeditions, wearing tiny soldier's attire that endeared him to the troops. However, childhood for someone in the ruling family was far from carefree. By age 7, Calvin had seen his father's suspicious death, likely caused by poisoning ordered by Emperor Timothy. He observed his mother Angela the Elder and his siblings vanish into exile, imprisonment, and ultimately death, all casualties of the delusional intrigues of Timothy. Imagine being a child, knowing that any knock on your door could be your last moment. Calvin learned to navigate a world where showing any sign of weakness meant certain death, and trust was a rare and precious commodity no one could afford to give. He became an expert in deception, appearing harmless while his family was being systematically wiped out around him. This early childhood trauma later fueled his obsessive desire to control and demean others, especially those who reminded him of the harsh power structures that had haunted his early years. When Timothy finally passed away in the year 37 of the Common Era, the people of Rome greeted 24-year-old Richard as their new emperor with heartfelt happiness. Here was the son of their cherished Gregory, the young man who had once won the affection of Rome's legions. After enduring decades under the suspicious and reclusive rule of Timothy, the people were eager for a youthful leader, one who pledged a revival of their former greatness. For 7 months, Richard appeared to embody all their hopes. He amnestied political exiles, generously rewarded the Praetorian Guard, and hosted magnificent public festivals. The population adored him. However, a drastic shift soon occurred, one that would turn the imperial palace from a center of governance into a stage for the emperor's darkest and most twisted sexual desires. At the end of 37 CE, Calvin became gravely ill with what contemporary accounts call a brain fever so intense that it virtually froze the empire. For several days, he hovered on the edge between life and death, casting a shadow of uncertainty over Rome's future. Richard's death left Rome holding its breath, fervently hoping for their young emperor's recovery. Some historians believe this illness caused lasting brain damage, while others suggest it merely removed the thin layer of sanity that had kept his darker desires controlled. When Calvin regained health, those close to him immediately noticed a shift. The young man who had once shown restraint and political insight had vanished. Instead, someone appeared who seemed disconnected from reality, unable to distinguish between what was sacred and profane, or between what was acceptable and beyond imagination. This change was not obvious to the public right away. It started with minor signs, such as excessive spending and strange behavior during private meetings, followed by increasingly unpredictable decisions. However, behind the closed doors of the imperial palace, a far more disturbing transformation was unfolding. Calvin had realized something during his near-death experience, a thrilling awareness that as emperor, he could do literally anything to anyone, and no one would be able to stop him. The palace staff were the first to witness this change. Servants who had loyally served the imperial family for years suddenly faced the emperor's strange whims and sexual demands. Young male slaves were especially vulnerable because Calvin often summoned them to his private rooms, forcing them into acts that violated every sense of dignity the empire upheld. Yet it was the female servants who, the oldest records, written in the careful language of their era, recount how the emperor would wander the palace halls during the night, choosing women at random to fulfill his desires. These encounters were never consensual. They were pure displays of dominance, aimed at asserting Calvin's total control over everyone within his realm. His sexual cravings extended beyond servants, as he began summoning the wives of senators and other prominent officials to private meetings, supposedly to discuss their husbands' careers or family issues. These women, raised under the strict moral codes of Roman nobility, found themselves trapped in situations where denying the emperor's advances meant death, not only for themselves, but also for their entire families. One particularly unsettling story describes how Calvin forced these women to strip naked and perform various lewd acts while he observed from his throne, occasionally bringing several women together to compete for his favor. The mental torment was as deliberate as the physical cruelty. What made Calvin's transformation of the palace especially dreadful was not merely the sexual abuse itself, but also how systematically he wielded sex as a tool to dismantle Roman society. He knew that by compelling the empire's proud Roman matrons, once respected leaders throughout the realm, to become mere objects for the emperor's pleasure, he was breaking down the very foundations of the social order. The calculated nature of this atrocity is what deepens the horror of his reign. The most esteemed members of society were compelled to take part in or witness acts of profound sexual humiliation. This shattered their spirits more deeply than any form of physical punishment could. The emperor started organizing lavish dinner parties that began as ordinary social events, but eventually descended into wild orgies. He invited senators along with their wives and daughters. At first, these gatherings pretended to be refined entertainment, yet as the night wore on, the emperor's requests became shockingly inappropriate. Senator Marcus, Calvin might say, his voice quiet and casual, as if asking for an extra glass of wine. "Your wife possesses such captivating eyes. I am curious to see them when she is on her knees before me." The senator had no choice but to remain silent, well aware that any objection could mean the death of his family. Meanwhile, the senator's wife was forced to engage in whatever vile acts Calvin demanded, often in full view of her terrified husband and children. The emotional scars inflicted on these families were frequently permanent. Marriages were shattered, children deeply traumatized, and proud Roman lineages reduced to mere tools for the emperor's twisted desires. Calvin especially enjoyed compelling senators to watch as their wives were degraded sexually. He even arranged seating specifically so husbands could clearly see their wives compelled to perform oral sex or engage in intercourse with Calvin or his chosen companions. The expressions on the men's faces were a chilling testament to their hopelessness and despair. A blend of fury, helplessness, and humiliation appeared to give Calvin as much pleasure as the sexual encounters themselves. The Imperial Palace complex, situated on Palatine Hill, underwent structural alterations to cater to Calvin's progressively intricate sexual desires. He commissioned unique chambers, created explicitly for group sexual activities, complete with elaborate staging and viewing areas. Historical architectural remnants indicate rooms where typical furniture was replaced by couches arranged in circles, enabling optimal visibility of sexual acts from several viewpoints. One such chamber, according to existing records, was designed like a small amphitheater with elevated seating surrounding a central space where the emperor would perform. Calvin compelled captured enemies, slaves, and occasionally Roman citizens to participate in various sexual acts, while audiences of senators and their families were forced to watch and applaud. The emperor's bedroom became an especially frightening place for those living in the palace. Unlike the private quarters of former emperors, Calvin's room featured viewing sections and multiple entries, allowing him to bring spectators to witness his encounters. He seemed to gain as much delight from being observed as from the acts themselves, treating these interactions as public displays of his absolute authority. Calvin also created what could only be termed a brothel. Inside the palace walls, inhabited by the wives and daughters of senators who had lost favor, these women were compelled to serve not only the emperor, but also his visitors, including foreign officials and, at times, ordinary soldiers. As the final form of humiliation, the emperor frequently supervised these acts himself, offering remarks and instructions much like a stage director orchestrating a performance. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how Calvin twisted sexual degradation into the religious and political ceremonies that were the core of Roman society. Time-honored rituals, once observed with grave respect for generations, were transformed into moments of public disgrace. During official Senate sessions, the emperor occasionally insisted that the wives of senators provide sexual services while their husbands managed state affairs. The sacred process of ruling became closely tied to these acts of humiliation, with crucial political decisions made as the empire's top leaders endured the suffering of their families. Religious ceremonies suffered a comparable corruption. Calvin proclaimed himself divine and demanded that sexual acts performed in his praise be included in religious rites. Priestesses who had pledged chastity were forced into public sexual acts during worship, while long-standing festivals became occasions for extravagant orgies involving unwilling participants drawn from the community. Rome's elite families were deeply affected by the emperor's marriage rituals, which gained a particularly infamous reputation. He continuously wed and divorced numerous times, often within mere days, using each marriage as a chance to publicly disgrace the bride's relatives. One story recounts how he made a bride's father witness the marriage's consummation in front of all the guests, turning a sacred ritual into a display of domination. Calvin's sexual desires extended beyond personal pleasure and became a method of economic intimidation targeting Rome's affluent families. The emperor would single out the most attractive wives and daughters of wealthy citizens, then demand access to them as a condition for their family's safety and continued wealth. This created a disturbing environment where nobles had to offer their female members as currency for political favor or simply to survive. Families often received invitations for their women to meet privately with the emperor, fully aware of the grim reality of such encounters, but powerless to decline without endangering everything they possessed. Beyond this, the emperor instituted an official system of taxation based on sexual services. Rich households were compelled to assign their women for designated periods to serve in the palace, with the length and frequency of service linked directly to their wealth. This system was not prostitution in the usual meaning of the word. Instead, it was an enforced form of sexual enslavement that stripped powerless families of control over their own members, imposing a brutal form of oppression under the guise of imperial authority. The empire's most privileged classes were subjected to a show of absolute imperial authority. Women who sought to resist or escape these arrangements endured horrific consequences. Some were compelled to perform public sexual acts as part of the gladiatorial games. Others were sold into genuine prostitution, their noble titles stripped away as they were forced to serve ordinary soldiers and slaves. The message was unmistakable. No one, no matter their birth or rank, was beyond the emperor's sexual control. The impact on the women involved in Calvin's sexual spectacles was catastrophic and enduring. These women had grown up within the rigid moral framework of the Roman aristocracy, taught that their chastity was their most valuable asset, and that their foremost responsibility was to their families and the empire. Suddenly, finding themselves reduced to mere sexual objects for the emperor's amusement caused profound psychological distress that went far beyond physical harm. Many women were made to engage in acts that violated not only their personal dignity, but also their deepest spiritual convictions. The conflict between their upbringing and the forced participation in sexual humiliation often resulted in total psychological collapse. Some women chose to end their own lives rather than submit to the emperor's demands, but Richard had foreseen this reaction. The families of women who committed suicide faced collective reprisals, sometimes even execution, reinforcing the brutal control the regime held over every aspect of life. The financial collapse that annihilated entire family lines created a circumstance where women found themselves caught between their personal dignity and their duty to their families, without any option that did not lead to ruinous consequences. The emperor appeared to derive a cruel satisfaction from breaking the will of women who initially resisted his advances. He subjected them to progressively humiliating sexual acts until they finally surrendered fully, their defiance shattered by the unyielding force of imperial power. These defeated women were then displayed as examples to frighten others, their total submission serving as a grim warning of the fate awaiting those who opposed the emperor's commands. Perhaps even more harrowing was the compelled involvement of Roman men in the degradation of their own families. Senators and other prominent officials were not just passive observers of the abuse inflicted upon their wives and daughters. More often than not, they were obliged to take an active part in organizing and enabling these encounters. These men became collaborators in the destruction of their own families. The emperor was fully aware of the power wielded through this manipulation. By making these men accomplices in the sexual exploitation of their own family members, he was dismantling their capacity to uphold any form of personal honor or self-respect. These men became collaborators in the destruction of their own families. The emperor was fully aware of the power wielded through this manipulation. By making these men accomplices in the sexual exploitation of their own family members, he was dismantling their capacity to uphold any form of personal honor or self-respect. A senator who aided in restraining his own wife for the emperor's indulgence could never regain the same esteem within the Roman Senate. His influence was irreversibly weakened by his involvement in the disgrace imposed on his family. Some men tried to defy by refusing to bring their female relatives to the palace events. However, Calvin had anticipated such resistance. Some were even forced into participation, their purity shattered as part of the emperor's systematic effort to corrupt every facet of Roman society. The long-term consequences on these individuals and the broader culture were profound and tragic. Richard appeared to realize that by inflicting sexual trauma on the offspring of Rome's elite, he was guaranteeing that his corrupt influence would persist beyond his own rule. As Richard's rule advanced, he began to systematize his sexual misconduct into a form of religious cult revolving around the worship of the emperor. He proclaimed himself a living deity and insisted that the sexual acts performed in his honor be regarded as sacred ceremonies. This was not simply vanity, it was a deliberate effort to justify his sexual exploitation by disguising it with religious legitimacy. Temples were built inside the palace grounds, where followers were compelled to participate in sexual acts as proof of loyalty to the divine ruler. These were not optional rites of faith, but obligatory performances imposed on anyone who sought imperial approval or merely aimed to evade the emperor's anger. The ruler orchestrated intricate rituals centered on his. Sexual encounters were accompanied by formalized procedures, and ritualistic practices. Intimate relations with the emperor or his appointed agents transformed into a sacred communion with the divine. Observing these acts turned into a mandatory form of worship for palace guests. Within this religious context, Calvin found justification for his most outrageous sexual demands. Provincial leaders, military officers, and other imperial agents were motivated to replicate the emperor's sexual court, creating a widespread structure of sexual exploitation and offenses. These local authorities knew that maintaining favor with Timothy depended on their readiness to engage in and promote sexual misconduct. They vied among themselves to develop ever more inventive methods of sexual degradation, sending detailed accounts of their innovations back to Rome in hopes of receiving imperial approval. This was not simply vanity, it was a deliberate effort to justify his sexual exploitation by disguising it with religious legitimacy. Temples were built inside the palace grounds, where followers were compelled to participate in sexual acts as proof of loyalty to the divine ruler. These were not optional rites of faith, but obligatory performances imposed on anyone who sought imperial approval or merely aimed to evade the emperor's anger. The ruler orchestrated intricate rituals centered on his. Sexual encounters were accompanied by formalized procedures and ritualistic practices. Intimate relations with the emperor or his appointed agents transformed into a sacred communion with the divine. By the year 40 of the Common Era, Calvin's lustful indulgences had escalated to degrees that alarmed even those familiar with his previous immoral behaviors. Events at the palace transformed into grandiose sexual performances lasting several days, involving hundreds who were compelled to take part in progressively outrageous acts. The final stage of the emperor's reign was characterized by sexual exhibitions unprecedented in both magnitude and cruelty. He organized vast orgies, including senators, their kin, foreign emissaries, slaves, and even animals, constructing scenes that symbolized his total dominance over human honor and ethical values. Provincial leaders, military officers, and other imperial agents were motivated to replicate the emperor's sexual court, creating a widespread structure of sexual exploitation and offenses. These local authorities knew that maintaining favor with Timothy depended on their readiness to engage in and promote sexual misconduct. They vied among themselves to develop ever more inventive methods of sexual degradation, sending detailed accounts of their innovations back to Rome in hopes of receiving imperial approval. Consequently, the entire empire became engulfed in a system where sexual abuse was commonplace. A common method of control over local communities was maintaining a constant state of fear among their inhabitants that their loved ones might be chosen for sexual favors by imperial authorities. This generated an atmosphere of dread, reaching far beyond the palace boundaries, impacting countless individuals across the Roman territories. Women throughout the empire came to understand that their bodies were no longer their own. At any moment, imperial agents could claim them for carnal purposes. This systematic sexual oppression became a defining element of Calvin's rule, leaving emotional wounds that permeated Roman culture for many generations. By the year 40 of the Common Era, Calvin's lustful indulgences had escalated to degrees that alarmed even those familiar with his previous immoral behaviors. Events at the palace transformed into grandiose sexual performances lasting several days, involving hundreds who were compelled to take part in progressively outrageous acts. The final stage of the emperor's reign was characterized by sexual exhibitions unprecedented in both magnitude and cruelty. He organized vast orgies, including senators, their kin, foreign emissaries, slaves, and even animals, constructing scenes that symbolized his total dominance over human honor and ethical values. These last acts appeared intended not merely for his own pleasure, but to express the essence of imperial authority itself by coercing Rome's most esteemed citizens into participation. In the most humiliating sexual acts, Calvin was making a philosophical argument about the futility of traditional Roman morals when faced with absolute power. The breaking point arrived when Calvin declared his plan to establish his sexual behaviors as the empire's official religion, mandating all Roman citizens to take part in sexual ceremonies as displays of allegiance. This effort to formalize and spread his sexual tyranny convinced the conspirators to take action. On the 24th of January in the year 41 CE, Calvin was killed by members of the Praetorian Guard inside the secret passages beneath his palace. Yet even after his death, the emperor's sexual abuses continued to haunt the survivors. The conspiracy was driven by not only political reasons, but personal grievances as well. Several of the assassins had been forced to witness the emperor sexually abusing their own family members. The succeeding emperor, Claudius, inherited the massive challenge of managing the consequences of Calvin's sexual reign of terror. There was overwhelming physical proof of the emperor's crimes, chambers designed for sexual torture, collections of explicit artwork portraying actual palace victims, and detailed logs of sexual encounters used as blackmail against influential families. Much of this material was discreetly destroyed, not to honor Calvin's reputation, but to shield the victims and their relatives from further disgrace. The rooms that had witnessed these horrors were carefully erased from memory to protect those who had suffered. Accounts of sexual abuse were either sealed away or fully restored, as if the new leadership aimed to wipe out any physical evidence of what had transpired. The cover-up reached the chronicles of history too. Although ancient writers clearly recorded Calvin's sexual offenses, they employed veiled expressions that hid the true scale of the mistreatment. Many survivors and their relatives accepted this discretion because detailed retellings of their suffering would only deepen their shame. The most heartbreaking part of Calvin's sexual terror was the way it silenced those affected. The Roman society, with its strong focus on honor and family name, made it almost unthinkable for victims to share their stories without ruining their social reputation. Women abused by the emperor faced a community prone to blaming them regardless of the situation. Men forced to witness their wives' debasement could not reveal what happened without also confessing to their own helplessness and indirect involvement. Children who had seen or been victims of sexual violence often kept their pain locked away for a lifetime. This code of silence implied that the true scope of Calvin's sexual offenses might never be uncovered. Families devastated by abuse had every reason to conceal their trauma, while historical sources were inevitably constrained by these unspoken barriers. Social norms dictated that open conversations about sexual issues were unacceptable for public discourse. This silence meant numerous victims never gained justice or even acknowledgement of their pain. The new imperial government prioritized political order over addressing previous wrongdoings, leaving survivors to deal with their distress without support or validation. The sexual offenses that took place within Calvin's palace had repercussions far beyond his 4-year rule. The emotional scars left on Rome's upper class resulted in long-term patterns of dysfunction impacting society for many years. Children who had seen or endured sexual abuse in the palace grew up with deeply impaired perceptions of sexuality, authority, and human connections. Many turned into offenders themselves, unable to separate normal sexual behavior from the abusive acts they witnessed during childhood. Others became victims once more, their early trauma making them susceptible to further harm. Families that survived Calvin's era often carried permanent wounds from their ordeal. Marriages shattered by coerced sexual acts rarely healed, while children raised amid such fear faced immense challenges in forming healthy adult relationships. The core social structure of Rome's nobility suffered irreversible damage due to widespread, systematic sexual abuse of its leading members. Perhaps most importantly, Richard's reign introduced a reign of sexual terror that set disturbing patterns of imperial abuse which echoed throughout Roman history. Later rulers, while perhaps not reaching Calvin's extremes, recognized that exploiting sexuality was a formidable method to control subordinates and crush political rivals. Nowadays, visitors stroll through the ruins of Palatine Hill, admiring the remnants of imperial magnificence without fully grasping the brutal events once played out within these decayed walls. Marble floors that once reverberated with the cries and sobs of unwilling victims now serve as the backdrop for tours and academic discussions about ancient Roman architecture. If you know where to search, undeniable traces still exist. Foundation stones that supported chambers built explicitly for sexual torture, drainage systems set to remove all physical proof of numerous assaults, and secret corridors where petrified victims awaited their chance to be called before the emperor. The spirits of Calvin's victims linger among these ruins. The senator's wife, who chose death over enduring another night under imperial scrutiny, the 10-year-old boy who witnessed his mother's torment, and the dignified Roman matron forced into prostitution inside the palace brothel. Their tales were intentionally wiped from historical records, yet their anguish remains deeply embedded in the very stones of this place. Calvin's transformation of the imperial palace into a realm of sexual terror lasted fewer than 4 years, yet its effects reverberated throughout Roman history and continue to echo today. The emperor's actions serve as a stark reminder that sexual violence has long been a tool wielded by those aiming to assert dominance and control. Even the most sophisticated civilizations can be deeply corrupted by individuals who impose no boundaries on their wielding of power. Although the palace now lies in ruins, the lessons it imparts remain powerful and enduring. The deliberate sexual victimization of the defenseless by those entrusted with authority is not just an ancient cruelty, but a recurring pattern seen whenever absolute power is unchecked and used malevolently. The only distinction between Calvin's reign of sexual terror and contemporary abuses lies in their scope and the extent of historical recording. The core relationship between power, control, and sexual exploitation troublingly persists across time. Ultimately, the emperor who turned his home into a scene of debauchery left behind more than suffering survivors and political disorder. He established a grim blueprint for sexual oppression. His influence is not memorialized through grand statues or engraved plaques, but in the invisible wounds endured by generations of victims. This legacy serves as a haunting reminder that the most devastating offenses are those that shatter not only the physical